At this juncture, I'll hand over to Kena to facilitate the interaction with Karina. Please enjoy. Kena.
Hello. Hi, everyone. Hi. My name is Kina Likimani. I am your moderator or facilitator. Ghanaians like such words. I'm just here to encourage discussion on the book. For the purposes of this gathering, I'm an avid reader. I have a book blog that is, I don't like to call it defunct. One of these days I'll go back. And that's Aisha. Hi, Aisha.
Hi, Kina.
How are you? Can everybody hear her?
I'm well. Can you hear me?
Yeah, good.
Okay. Wonderful.
This is Aisha. Aisha, this is your third book.
This is the third one, yes.
Aisha, I was just echoing with Frankie that you have a high production rate. and I think you are about to release another book.
Yeah, the fifth one. But I think, yes, I think after this I'll be pausing for a while. So
okay.
Yeah.
Frankie was saying that you were moving away from the 100 wells of Salaga, and I implore you to not move away too quickly. Because this is a very special book for all sorts of reasons. I think in terms of Ghanaian literature, I'm always appointing important books. Somebody said I should stop, but I don't care. I think this is one of our most important books of whatever century we are in now. Thank you for writing it.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much.
I think you go into, have all of you read the book?
Yeah.
It's okay, you can sit and say you haven't read the book. But what I'm going to say is that when I moderate conversations with writers, I try and not give away the plot, any spoilers or any of those things in case people haven't read the book. But to whet your appetite, I encourage you to find the book and read it. Because right here, there is a quote from Muhammad dropping names. And it says, who says that there are no good authors coming from Ghana? Shut up. Have you read Aisha Harinata? I think she made this in response to an interview by Akwesi Sapon.
Akwesi Sapon, yes.
And Akwesi Sapon, people feel they have to be, journalists, they always feel like they have to be adversarial. You actually don't have to be. There's not always have to be an adversary. But anyway, he sets the interview up as, oh my goodness, we do not have young writers, not in Ghana or across Africa. And my mother made a point to tell him that he hadn't been reading and that there are lots of younger writers and that, have you read Aisha Harinata? So when we are done here, the next time we gather here for the fall read, I will be here. I will be asking you whether you've read it. So please read the book. Please read the book. So Aisha,
yes,
my first question to you is, and you go a little bit in the back of the book, but really I want you to talk about why the topic, why this book, what made you write it?
I think it came from my curiosity. I want to know everything about my past, who my ancestors are, what voyages they went on, how we ended up where we are now. So I made my father sit down, and if you know my father, that's not an easy thing to do because he's very busy. But I made him sit down and draw a family tree. This was about 10 years ago, maybe in 2011, 2010, thereabouts. And so he drew the paternal line and was filled with twins, which was very intriguing. And then he drew the maternal line. But that one started with a person who he called the slave. And I was intrigued and saddened, partly ashamed. I had a range of emotions. I wanted to know who this person was, why she didn't have a name, why she was called a slave. And he knew a few things. And so he told me she could have come from Burkina Faso, Mali, or Niger, probably Fulani or Guma, that she was considered beautiful and she had reddish skin. So this is all I had to go by, and I was intrigued. And then I went up to Salaga, which is where she ended up. And that opened up a whole world because I learned about Salaga being a strategic point in Ghana's history of pre-colonial Ghana, before Ghana was Ghana. And that this was because there was external interest in the area, but also there was internal or internecine interest as well. So for a writer, it was just ripe for story, ripe for drama. And I began doing a lot of research, and the more I dug deeper, the more the world was fascinating. Because the topic I think that you're referring to is also that of slavery, if I'm not wrong, Kina. At this point, slavery is technically abolished, and yet we find out that this woman is enslaved. So it's also an interesting time because in the Gold Coast, you can have enslaved people, but Salaga is sort of outside of this area. So it's about how people navigate these different spaces as change is taking place. So,
can everybody hear her?
Yes.
Good. So for those of you who don't know, I'll just give you a short thing. This book is about, let's say, domestic slavery, right? As opposed to the transatlantic. There are two central characters, Amina, who is taken as a slave she's captured from her home, also in northern Ghana, and taken to Salaga. And Salaga, as they say, was a town set up mostly to sell human beings.
Mm-hmm.
And there were 100 wells, and the wells are dug so that the slaves can be washed. And Amina is later purchased by the other central character, a princess, Warche of the Dagwang. Her father was a Kempogula, yes. And so this is really a story about colonial forces, about history, and it's set. Let me just set it up for them. It's set in Salaga and Ketekrache, and I didn't know, and maybe some of you knew, the different colonial history and the sort of impact and the forces of the German forces with the English forces. None of this I knew. So so not only is it one of the few books that go into slavery from our point that we participated in, but it also looks at colonial history and the history of a part of Ghana that a lot of us, I think, don't know anything about. We've all assumed that up until a certain point, it was mostly British people who were the most recent colonial masters would be British, but so that area has a very specific history in Ghana and a very specific colonial history. So that's that one.
Yes.
What I wanted to say was that when your father drew the maternal line and there was the slaves there, was that something that your family, everybody talked about, or was it like hidden history?
This was hidden history. The first time I found out about this was when he drew up the family tree, because I knew about his grandmother, Imashetu. She's the one after whom I'm named. So Imashetu is this woman's daughter. But that's where the stories ended with Imashetu. We never talked about who Imashetu's mother was until I sat down and then we drew the family tree. And he didn't know much either. And he's a very curious man. So I figure people just did not want to talk about this ancestor. Went up to Salaga to try to get people showing me where she could have walked, what her story was, and nobody would tell me anything. Nobody. So I just began to sort of piece together who she could have been from who my father is, who his siblings are, how his mother raised him, and then the stories about his grandmother, and then all these values that have been passed down from generation to generation. I sort of used to build up Amina's internal, because the external, we knew she had the skin color, we knew she was beautiful. But nobody would talk about her. Only recently, this is after, maybe 2 years after the book was published, and it was published in 2018. So this was last year. We have a family WhatsApp group, And I found out that slave wives from this time would have worn a special scarf. So now the details are coming out. And they gave more life to the book because I feel like the 100 Wells of Salaga, unlike what Frankie said, is creating a universe for me, and I'm not giving it up at all. I have the Deep Blue Between, and I've been thinking about Amina's father as well. But just this detail about when a scarf says a lot as well, that her journey continued. So it was a small piece of information. It doesn't really change the story, but for me as a writer, it was very intriguing and can open other doors to what her story could have been.
So presumably, as you said, you did a lot of research. So you did the family, you tried to construct the life of what would have been Amina. And Wache. Where the character of Wache as a Gabon princess, did you base that on someone or you sort of inferred from the history?
So Wuche came about as I was doing the research. She's actually Gonja. She's a Gonja princess.
Gonja, yeah.
And she came about just because of one line I read in J. Brymer's Salaga, the Struggle for Power. And he said that, or he wrote that Salaga princesses were the freest women you could find in that town of Salaga and Pimbe. Because if they found a man who pleased them, they could even break up his marriage and then take him for themselves. So to me, it was interesting. I thought, wow, okay, to have a woman who has such power, in contrast to my ancestor who is enslaved, that could be interesting as well. What kind of relationship can develop between them, and to see how both navigate these very male-centered worlds, because at that time all the chiefs were male. But then once I started writing, I learned that there was a woman called Buwuche who was powerful enough. She was a sister of one of the Gonja chiefs, and she was given a group of 300 men to lead to safety. It was during a war. So then I based Wuche's character, or I named Wuche's character here. So, yeah.
It's interesting to me that you said you got inspired by one line. By a line.
Yes.
Yeah. The writer Leila Lalami, she's also written a bigger book, The Morse Account.
Okay.
And she also, it's a story, another book you should read. The Morse Account is about an expedition to, I think, somewhere Latin America. And the entire group of explorers, whoever, the Spaniards, they all got malaria and died. They didn't reach where they were going. And there was this one line, you know these explorers and colonialists, they keep details. But in the detailed accounts, there was just one line about a Black person in the entire crew. And she also reads it and rescues him from history and writes a whole book about him. So thank you.
Amazing.
I want to talk about the characters.
Yes.
Usually when people write slave narratives, or it's the enslaved who is the stronger, the more confident, you see, to overcome. It's not like Amina is not a confident person, but of course she gets overtaken by events outside of her control, and even when she starts having her own internal monologue about freedom, you see she has to work her way up to it. Why did you feel the need to back that trend?
I don't know. I don't know that I set out to back a trend. I think when I write, I just let the characters guide me. And Amina ended up being a strongly quiet or quietly strong character. And I don't know. I think in a lot of stories I hear about slavery in the West African context, there's a lot of melding. Like, people don't leave their enslavers per se. They end up getting married into the families. And that's the story I heard a lot. So I wanted to play with that idea as well, where you sort of stick to the person who enslaved you. And I don't want to give away too much because it will be a spoiler. She doesn't quite stick to Wuche, but there's the person that she does end up with is still in this world of enslaving. And when I heard about Amina's story, it was a family, it was a complicated thing because Amina was enslaved, but there was somebody else in the family who had enslaved her and kept her in the family. So I really don't want to give away too much, which is why I'm not expressing what I want to express well. But yeah, so Amina was in the family and there was an enslaver as well. So I wanted to keep those two stories together.
What else can I tell you about the book without giving it away? I won't tell you anything else. No, but I'm serious. For Ghanaian or no Ghanaian, but especially if you're Ghanaian, you should read this book. Because we tend to have a very flattened view of the North. And we tend to have a very flattened view of colonialism. These days, we don't even have views of colonialism. We just think something happened along the way. So to have this kind of book where it's not flattened, the characters are given full agency, and there's a lot of history. And it's also, I mean, I know we are going to talk about history and slavery, but it's also a truly enjoyable read. It's a fast read.
Sorry,
Oh, you're back.
Yeah.
Yes. The question, I wanted to have a conversation about slavery, and then we'll move on to the book again because it's part of the book. So she does something amazing. It irritates me a bit because the bad characters are not really bad. The bad characters are also good people, which is what happens in life, right?
Yeah.
It's hard to imagine that any of our politicians are good people, but they are good people to the people they are good to. You see? But that's what she does. So she comes, well, I'm not going to give away, but you know, there are people in this book who are trading in human beings, and then they turn out to have tender hearts, you know. But that's how, as you said, that's how power works. Now, what I want to ask is, I tend to want to describe our slavery as soft slavery. It's like soft slavery. And then the transatlantic slavery as the kind of hard, dry, the kind of hard slavery.
Yeah.
Because even in my family, I think in most families, especially Akan families, we had slaves.
Yeah.
And if you all ask, there will be that, you know, if you look in my family, it manifests as there's this old lady, and she's very mean. She was very mean to a certain group of people in our family. And when you go into, she'll tell you, where you don't go for their slaves. Like she just never let,
Yeah. Yeah.
And I call it soft, not to excuse it because it's all horrific.
Yeah.
Because we domesticated, you know, they became members. My family line, there's a slave line, but they are all us now. You see? When we call it Busian, they are all part of the female line, right?
Yeah.
Because we brought my family, we didn't have people. So they brought a slave, a woman, who became part of our family and got married and had children. So we are Akan, so we are matrilineal. So she has a major line and we are all one now. But that's what people did when they wanted height, when they wanted people, when they wanted labor.
She came from the north?
No, she didn't actually. She was captured somewhere from the Western region. You know, Fantis colonized the Fanti colonization of Western region. It's not good. But anyway, do you think that our type of soft slavery, of course, we are then complicit in what I would call the hard slavery, blinded us to, did we assume that when we captured our own people and sold them to be taken across the sea, did we think they were going to be treated the way we even treated our slaves here? Is that why we were so complicit in it? And also why we don't want to talk about it because we think it's not a big deal?
I think you find it all. I think you find people who are ashamed of what we did. I think you find people who say, yes, it wasn't a big deal. It's in the past, move on. I think you find people who say we had to eat, we had to do what we had to do to survive. I think it's a mixed bag, but then money, power, all those things just make people not think. You're not thinking of the consequences. You're not thinking of tomorrow. You're not thinking of what's going to happen to your brother or sister or most likely stranger as he is thrown onto a boat and sent goodness knows where because you're getting paid. So I think it's a mixed bag. But we still see it now with our politicians. We see it with our leaders, who are ready to just sell a whole lot of land and our resources because it's taking care of their pockets today. And then tomorrow, we're the ones who, our grandchildren are the ones who suffer. So I just see these images repeating themselves in different ways. But same thing, it's exactly the same thing. We're selling people then, now we're selling our resources. And if you talk to a politician today, he'll probably say, but we need to employ people. What's he gonna say? He's gonna say, this project we're doing here is going to bring schools and what into the society, but we're not thinking of the consequences. So yeah, there's no one answer to me, but I think some turned a blind eye, some were really sorry, and others were just like, it is what it is, it's life, we need to eat. So it was a mixed bag.
I want to ask about Woche. Woche is the Gonja princess. And these days in a largely Christian society where women are getting oppressed and everything, she gets up to some very scandalous things. It will shock modern Ghanaians. Honestly, and I'm glad you wrote it because it's almost as though, these days you are in a bad marriage, you have to stay in a bad marriage. If you are unhappy, you have to stay being unhappy. It's like people don't have any agents, like women can't
do anything.
First of all, the Ghanaian men, I think they love oppression. So,
yeah.
But Woche, she's a dream. In fact, both of them are, and it's good that you base it on a character because the ways in which she goes after what she wants is clear in what she wants, is clear in her power, because she's of course complicit in the slave trade, right? Because she's a woman of power. Yes. But being a woman of power, she exercises that power. She knows she has rights. She knows she can influence. You see what I'm trying to say?
Yeah.
I want you to talk a little bit about her.
So Woche is described in the book as possessing a male spirit. And she has a brother who has a female spirit. So the grandmother says, the whoever filled your bodies with your spirits made a mistake. But she is also her father's favorite. She's this woman who goes for what she wants because of that one line that we mentioned. But also, as I was writing her, she became complicated. She doesn't have a mother. This is something we find out quite soon. So she's also always looking for love from anyone who would give it to her almost. And I guess when she doesn't find it, she just says, okay, I'm closing that door and I'm moving on. But I really enjoyed writing her because I heard about women in Ghana in the 1950s and through the 60s, women who never quite got married, but did have like 5 children by 5 different men. And it was accepted. And I found it fascinating. So that kind of spirit I also worked into Woche, even though she is forced at some point into an arranged marriage. This is not a spoiler, it's quite early in the book. She's like these women in the 50s who was like, why am I unhappy? If it's not working, and she takes matters into her own hands. What else is there to say about Woche? She's aspirational also for me. She's the kind of woman I want to be when I grow up, I think in almost every book I write, I have a badass. And this is just the writer projecting her desires. Like, I want to be that kind of woman who is just, no nonsense. She's she follows her desires, which is not to say I don't, but I am very Ghanaian at the same time, and I'm like, people are looking, you don't do, there are things that aren't done, so even writing this book, there's certain scenes that aren't done, and I was like, okay, I'm writing this, and people are going to read this, my mother is going to read it, but at some point I invoked my Wuche spirit, and I just wrote those scenes because they're important and they're part of life. So yeah.
Thank you. Well, thank you for her. When you were writing it, were you aware you were writing an important book, or is for us to tell you it's important?
It's with the reader. So thank you.
Writers always say that. They laugh.
No, but
You
I
didn't
think
it was important.
I thought it was important for me. I thought it was important for my family. I thought it was important for Ghanaians, because as I was reading, I was like, what? This happened? I had no clue that Salaga was just a strategic area, and there are consequences up to today because of that neutral zone that was formed. This is why the Asante look the way they do. Like, all these details that kept coming up. And I thought, why aren't we taught history this way in school, with interesting characters and personalities, and even the Gonja War and even with the Dagong as well, the Andani Gates and the Abudu Gates, and how one line is supposed to inherit the other, and these things trickle down even to today. And then when you hear Ayana has been beheaded in the south, you're like, oh, what's going on? But these things started a long time ago. And then the colonial projects or colonial horrible machine also came and made these things worse for people. So I thought it was an important book for Ghanaians. Yeah.
In fact, when our president created the 6 additional regions, I would never in another decade before I even have agreed. I'll be like, why? But I found myself agreeing for many reasons. But one of them was that if we are not going to develop, everybody should have a piece of whatever pie is there if we are not going to have equal development. But also that I think they created a new region out of that space. And it made, and if I hadn't read this book, I'd be like, well, why? But of course I read the book, which you are all going to read. And it made sense to me that they are, because of their unique history, if you can give them a unique history, unique lives, very different from how we have conceived our whatever post-colonial projects we think we are doing.
Yeah.
That they, in recognition of who they were, what they've been through, the uniqueness that they get their region, I thought, well, that's as well. One of the few decisions I have agreed with. But anyway, I'm going to stop and ask, Gifty, one of the NYU staffers here was like, oh, if I ask this question, I may have to, it's like a spoiler. She didn't like where you ended. It's a thing with, I don't know, Ghanaian readers especially. They're like, it's as though they want the books to go on. Books must end. So she was like, the only thing she didn't like about the book was that it ended. She wanted to know what happened.
Yeah.
Tell her something.
Gifty. There's a new book, The Deep Blue Between. This one follows the twins from the 100 Wells of Salaga, because I couldn't stop thinking of them. So you have that book, and I'm telling you about Amina's father, who's been haunting me. So maybe down the line, after I come out of my semi-retirement, we'll follow Baba too in the Mali region. That's all I can say for now. When he, does his whole act of, what's the word? Oh, why am I blanking out? Possessing me, yes. When he possesses me, then that story will pour forth. So don't worry, Gifty. There's a whole universe that's being born from.
There's more coming.
This, yeah.
I must Oku. It's not a secret. Aisha has been mentored by Ikoyama. And so when she wrote this book, I was like, yay, there. What did he say to you? Because he also does historical fiction, doesn't he?
He does. I think at this point, I sort of run away from my mentor. He mentored me in the first book, but I needed to break away from his voice to be able to find mine. So he started giving me feedback, and I just found myself saying, actually, no, I'm going to do this my way. So yeah, that's what happened then. So
But
yeah, I broke away.
anyone has questions, you can ask her anything, whether you've read the book or not, anything, whether you are interested in how to be a writer, her writing process.
My name is Alpha. I went to NYU in Singapore. I also happen to help out with the NYU Accra site. And I procrastinate a lot. I was told to read this book many, many months because I knew this event was coming on, but I didn't read it until the day we started Ramadan, which was on the 13th. And I chose a very unusual time to start reading the book, which was right after Iftar, breaking fast. And as I flipped through the first few pages, I could see Masa and Kuli and Salaga, and it's like, wow, I can identify with this. My wife actually has part of the background from ancestry from Kano. And as I read through the characters, I mean, which she had told me stories about one of the aunties, you know, and I'm in that story. When I grew up, my dad was quite generous. We had all kinds of people coming into the house. Some came into the house, they were there, worked, lived with us. And sometimes when you look at it, it's like, where did they actually come from? But they were in the house to help and working all the time. I mean, is that part of the things that we're talking about in the story? I think it was. You know, because all they did was just to work. Even though, you know, we depended for them and took care of a few things. There's so many things in the book that I identified with. But anyway, I haven't finished reading it. But the two characters, Amina and Wuche, I think right from the beginning, the setup. When Amina went to the market and then we found this man touching him because she has something to sell. Right away, it's like she doesn't have the power. Somebody has to do something to her. And then we saw that, you know, at least up to the point that I've read, that this is where her life was leading to. And then we see Uche, who is advising the dad about what they should do and not separate from the Dagon, you know, instead coming together as opposed to going to seek friends somewhere else. And then eventually, at least up to the point that I've read to, her power and all the things that they did. So I think the foreshadowing of these characters were just amazing.
Thank you.
In 1969, I have a Yoruba ancestry. And I think in 1969, that was when they did this compliance order. And my grandparents were born here, great-grandparents were born here. And then they owned a few shops in Mopala, because Mopala at the time were built by the Yorubas. But during the compliance order, they had to send most of them back. I think at that time, I wasn't born then, but some of my siblings, in order for them to be here and not to have any promotion, when they asked where they were from, they would say they were from Salaga. And I quite remember when I was about 5 or 6 years old, I was with one of my brothers, and then he said, was from Salaga. I said, no, you're not from Salaga. But I guess that was a way for them to feel Ghanaian at the time. And somehow, I also started identifying with them. My mom actually used to buy yam from Salaga and bring to Accra. So I've always been fascinated about them. So some years back, I went to Salaga to do a project, the documentary. So there were so many, every single page that I went through, there was something that I could identify with. And I'm so excited, and I can't wait to go back to finish the book. I'm going to have really finished before coming here. But I think it's such a beautiful read. And one of the things that I'm curious about, all your descriptions, you know, did you really stay in those spaces to watch how those things are done? Or was it just pure imagination? If it's pure imagination, it's so vivid and it's real. But that's how things are. Thank you for writing this book.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. I just want to comment on the Salaga Yoruba connection because there actually is one. I think it was around the same time that Salaga was settled. It was settled by a man called Bature who came from Nigeria, modern day Nigeria. So there's already that connection and that movement of people from the Nigeria area to the Ghana area. And at some point, there was a Yoruba man who came to Salaga and he traded in horses. And then because of the war in Salaga, he moved to Accra and set up the horse riding, cattle trading. So the Brima family in Accra, they have a direct link to Salaga, and they're from Yoruba land. So there is a link, and it makes sense that your family would say that they were from Salaga. And also my aunt told me this story about how there were lots of Yoruba people in Salaga during the all along, and then because of the Compliance Act, people just went through Salaga, and the people she'd grown up with were suddenly like just kicked out or running away themselves. So there is a strong link between Yorubas and Salaga. And on description, what I do is I try to immerse myself as deeply as possible in whatever space and time I'm working with. So if it's the 1900s, I read everything I can find my hands on. So even academic papers, advertisements, I love those. I love ads from that era in the few newspapers that I could get my hands on. But even things coming from Europe and America, because these products were making the rounds at the time. And so I absorb as much as I can. I will read, even for the Deep Blue Between, I would read about ships and like the ports of entry, where they're going, all sorts of weird things, just so I'm as deeply into the world as I can. And then when I begin writing, I can use my imagination because I know what kind of furniture we're dealing with. I know what kind of comb Wuche would use for her hair. I have a visual already because I've done so much research and absorption of what that word could feel, look, even smell like. And then there's things that are still familiar, like masa and kole and all these things that you mentioned. Those are things that are still in my family. Like when I go up to the north, the smell of shea butter and of the particular smells I associate with the north, and I imagine that has been there for a long time. So those are things I invoke in my writing.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I actually don't have a question because I have to admit, when Gifty invited me, I said, if you haven't read the book, she says, come anyway. And I'm so glad.
We are glad you are here. Because
We're very happy with you. Okay,
So glad I'm here. For some irrelevant history, your father and I were pioneers of NAFT way back then.
Mm-hmm.
I graduated from NYU, I'm sure before you were born. NYU dinosaurs, as we speak. But I just came to say congratulations, and I'm glad Gifty invited me, because hearing the questions that have been asked and your answers, I'm so eager to go and dig into the book. I'm glad you didn't spoil it. Nothing has been spoiled. Except I'm now expecting some funny ending, but but I just came to say congratulations.
Thank you.
And I'm wondering why you have not been on my show. So expect my producer to be calling very soon.
All right. Thank you, Kesa.
Thank you. Any other questions? Back there is Martin Ebel. Martin, stand. Since I'm
putting him on the spot.
In case you people don't know, and some of you don't know, that's Martin Ebel, one of our young, so-called young, young in Ghana can be 60.
Yeah, when does one stop being a young writer? I want to know.
And so that is Martin, and as I am always appointing important people, he's an important Ghanaian writer.
Mm-hmm.
Brilliant.
And founder of the Writers Project of Ghana.
And of the Writers Project of Ghana. So hopefully he will take a link and add him to this his mailing list, and you attend this event. Go and look for Martin's books as well. Any other questions? Yes, please.
Congratulations. Good evening. My name is Lakeisha Marie. I'm actually an alumni of NYU. Earlier, like I'm a young auntie. I was class of 2008, but now I live in Ghana. And one of the things that stuck with me when I was here was just the idea of storytelling. I used film back then, but now I run a PR agency in efforts to tell stories about what's happening to people's businesses and things like that. So, however, I do have ambition to write as well. So my question to you is, can you speak to maybe your writing process? And I know that that probably might be a very personal thing, but if there's any tips or cues or things that you can share for people that are aspiring writers. And congratulations again.
Wonderful. So my process varies from book to book. The very first book, I had Ayikwe Ama as my mentor, and he held my hand, you know, taught me how to do everything from planning a novel all the way up to the layout of a book, which was really, really vital information at the time and has given me jobs outside of the writing thing, which doesn't always pay. So I've been able to use those skills to make a little money here and there. But from that book, I then went on to get an MFA, which is one way you can also go. I did my MFA at NYU, as was said earlier. And that sort of didn't teach me how to write per se, but it gave me time to read and write. It gave me a network of writer friends that I can go to whenever I need advice or feedback. And yeah, people you can call on when the writing thing isn't going so well. So that's another approach, doing school. And then with the third book, that's when I began to really try to find my voice on my own without a professor or a mentor, and to just do it on my own. And so that involved doing writers' residencies where you can carve out space to just write for a month, 2 months, depending on what you find, sometimes even 6 months. So I did a residency in Brazil for 2 months, which gave me not only space, but also material, because I was in Bahia, where a lot of people ended up on the transatlantic, because of the transatlantic slave trade. So that definitely gave me material that fed back into this book. So those were the 3 ways I did the first 3 books. And with all 3 books, I planned. I take Excel and I sort of know where I'm going. It's like there's an analogy I can share. Like if you want to go to Tamale, you're gonna take your car, you know, you stop in Kumasi, maybe you stop in Kintampo or wherever along the way, Salaga, not really because it's on the other side, but you make stops along the way and then eventually you get to Tamale. So that's one way to go. But with the 4th and 5th books, I just hopped in the car and said, let's drive, let's see where we end up. So that's another way to write, where you're just going from sentence to sentence and letting the characters and the language guide you. And I found this latter process to be magical almost, because as you're writing, you're discovering things. It's like just driving and wow, there's a waterfall over here, and then you drive and then there's something else, a forest, or it's such a magical process. So I think going forth, I'm going to try and marry the two, because in the end, my brain still likes structure. And so I will still do the let's drive somewhere, and then at the end of the day say, okay, maybe we're getting close to Tamale now, so we should head towards Tamale, and then we can see how the journey played out. So I hope that makes sense. And for writing tips, I think just starting, just take your computer or your notebook and just start. And what I do, what has been so life-changing for me, is my first draft is my draft. I don't show it to anybody. Nobody needs to know what I scribbled. And it's just the draft where you dump everything that's on your mind. And then you come back and refine that process. You can check out chapters because they make no sense. But just in showing up every day, you exercise that muscle. And I think magic flows from there. It's a word I like using a lot for the process, but it does feel like that. But if you don't show up, magic is not going to happen. You need to come to the page every day. So that's what I do. And then once you start writing, there's other things that come along the way. But I think just start. If you have a full-time job, you said you have a PR company, in the evenings before you go to bed, just carve out, even if it's 30 minutes a day, write a short paragraph every day. If you write a short paragraph for 3 months, you're going to have something. you know? So yeah, that's what I'd advise for now.
Thank you so much. That's definitely insightful. I appreciate it.
Yes, comment.
Hi, good evening. My name is Kwame Adabedakwa, also an NYU alumni. A bit more recent. I graduated in 2016. But then just to piggyback off the last comment here, I know in November it's the National Novel Writing Month.
Yes,
So if you want to hone your skills in writing, you can follow that online.
yeah.
And it's very useful.
Mhm.
But for my end, I have a bit of a technical background. I did engineering. So I love being in a space like it because I get to challenge myself and move beyond what I do my day to day. But something I noticed growing up in Ghana, if I'm looking across Africa, is that a lot of our narratives center around the ideas of slavery and the colonial experience. But when I look at maybe world literature, you have stuff like the Epic of Gilgamesh, you have books about the formation of other cultures, right? But when I look at Ghana, for example, what's our equivalent of that, right? You mentioned that when you're writing about slavery, you like to meet yourself with advertisements, book reports about that era. But I'm thinking for the broader audience who want to learn about Ghana before slavery, before the ages of maybe Mansa Musa, so maybe 500 years ago, what's happening here? And from the author's point of view, how can we explore that so that maybe within the next generation, you have an equivalent of maybe the Epic of Gilgamesh, which people could tap into, which serves as prehistory before slavery? Because my concern is that we have a lot of focus on that period, which is very useful, but we don't know what happened before that, right? And how does that forge our identity as a country and even as a sub-region? So a bit of a general question. I haven't read the book, I'm sorry, but I'll read it going forward. And I want to hear your perspective on that. Thank you.
So I sort of agree and disagree with you. We do have epics. There's the Epic of Sunjata. There's stories about Queen Amina. There's stories about all these women and well, not all these women, because the women's stories are few and far between, but all these men. There's the hunter's story from Mali. In Senegal, they have their equivalent of stories. And I think there are writers who are tapping into these narratives and bringing them into our time. But why I say I disagree is because my work with Amma has been to look at Africa in a long range of time. So even before contact with Europeans, even before contact with the east of here. So we read hieroglyphics, we take apart all these texts that are 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 years old. And there are books. He has published with his collective here in Senegal, books. There's one that's a love story from 4,000 years ago. There's another one that's about a man who is going on his way and a public servant tries to cheat him. Does that sound familiar? From 4,000 years ago. So these things exist and you just have to sort of know where to find them. So if you're interested in that kind of story, you can check out Per Ank books. They've been working on this for a while. But why I agree with you is because, yeah, we do get myopic and we do sort of think of our history in terms of contacts with Europe. So even for me, it's when I started working with Amma that I stopped being so short-sighted. And I've been able to see that there are all these stories, there's all this information that exists about us, and you just have to know how to access this information. So reading hieroglyphics, or not quite reading, I can use a dictionary to sort of translate hieroglyphics, has taught me stuff about Africa from millennia before any of us existed. So there are stories you sort of just need to know how to find them. And I think my job is also to write these stories, which is why I'm starting slowly going back. Hamatan Rain was independent, Saturday Shadows was more contemporary. The 100 Daughters of Salaga was set because of this ancestor in times when people were being enslaved. but I have designs on writing about, medieval Africa, and then a book that's set 4,000 years ago. So they're coming. They're coming. I just need more time in the day.
I think I'm going to also respond to the question. You have an outdated view of African literature. It just so happens we are discussing a book on slavery, which is important, but it is also a different type of history. I think that a lot of people do think that, we talk a lot about colonial times, right? In fact, we don't talk as much. It's a very traumatic event, and we need to interrogate it as much as we can. But also, the reason I'm saying I have an outdated view is that here in Ghana, for instance, there is a thriving thing even in science fiction, African fantasy. Martin behind you, let me tell you about Martin, one of Martin's. Martin wrote a story where this guy he had an apartment filled with computers because he was hacking lottery, is that right? And somebody else wanted to find his secrets or whatever. They wanted to find out what he was doing. So this somebody, let's say Kina, I go to a juju person, I say, I want to go into his place and blah, blah, blah. The priest tells me, the Kung tells me that, I'm telling you the whole story, should we be saying it?
You're spoiling it.
That I should go and bring him, Matt, was it a white bull? A white goat, a completely white goat. I couldn't find a white goat, but I found a white goat, except the balls were black. And the Okwanfu warned me about this, but I didn't heed. I, of course, am a man. Kina is a man in this story. So the juju man helps me and says, now you can go through his walls. The reason everything had to be white was that going through the walls was empowered by the whiteness of the goat. But the balls of the goat were what?
Black.
So the man goes through the walls, which is science fiction, imbued with some, African religion stuff. And his balls, when he has to run away because someone is coming, when he's trying to escape, his balls do not go through the wall. So when they come, there is this room filled with lab computers churning out all sorts of algorithms with a perfectly beautiful set of black balls that are throbbing, because balls, they throb. And somewhere in Accra is some man who is actually not even bleeding because there was no blood. He's missing his private balls. These are stories that have been written by Africans, by Ghanaians and Africans. We in fact, one of the, Aisha is rare actually among her contemporaries, because a lot more of them are writing contemporary African stories. So our problem is capacity. We do not have nearly the number of writers we need to cover all the stories. But there are things happening, which means go and look for Martin's story. Martin is very about that. It's fantastic. I never heard that, the balls thing. Yeah. And it made complete sense. So it's not like, a Ghanaian movie where people are shouting. It made sense. They wanted to find out what his secret was. And there was science. Martin is a physics teacher. So, of course, there's computers and algorithms in the story.
The love stories, contemporary love stories, the graphic novels.
It's not that and people are doing graphic novels. There's a lot happening. The difference, and this is what I want to say, is that in the past, but even now, sad to say, people get their sense of literature from education. But the vast majority of works that are being produced in Africa now are not making their way into education, which is how it should be. It means we actually have more kappa. And also because the education people are corrupt, so that's a whole different conversation. Which means that as an African person who wants to indulge and surround themselves with African art, you have to work and find the spaces. The books are there, the collectives are there, and it's fantastic. You see what I'm saying? You'll find something to entertain you. Any other question? Gifty has a question. Oh, or if I didn't like the ending.
I wanted more, so probably you have to tell me personally how, Like I went back just in case I know something, but it had ended.
Aw.
So maybe I'll contact you personally for that. So my question is, when I read the book, a lot of things were just going through my mind, a lot of emotions. So I want to know from your perspective, like what were the kind of emotions going through your mind? I think at the end, you made mention of the fact that I think your great grandmother was a slave. You know, so and then through research and all that, you also got to know, I think with Amina's part, you know, find ways to inculcate it in the book. Personally, what was going through your mind as you were writing the book? Amina being separated from the family, seeing that the brother, you know, like the twins at a point when they were like,
Don't give away the.
you know, being snatched away into another group, and at a point, I think Isa dies, becomes weak and all that. And then
This one is spoiling the story.
Yeah,
okay.
your emotions. What
Yes.
was
So,
going through?
there were a range of them, you know, like even when the book opens up, I like to say it's like imagine Beyonce appears. For Amina, the caravans were the highlight of her year. It's like this majestic figure comes through and there are all these horses. So that in the beginning of the book, it's like a pop star has appeared and your favorite pop star has shown up and you're, you know, euphoric and excited because you never know what the caravans are going to bring. But there's also a foreboding, and I felt that as I was writing. And then obviously these bad events happen, and I definitely shed a few tears here and there. But I think once I was done with the book, the overriding emotion was catharsis. I felt like I had done right by my ancestor, I'd given her a name. She'd gone from the slave to Amina to being translated into all these languages. So not only did I give her a name, but I gave her legs. Her story has traveled all over the world into all these unexpected corners. And so, yeah, a mixture of pride and catharsis is, I think, the feeling I was left with at the end of the book.
Any other questions? Martin, I have a question.
I have to read your story now.
Martin has a question.
I like putting Martin on the spot all the time.
Thank you very much
Hi,
for this
Martin.
wonderful evening. Yeah, hi, Aisha. Thank you, have given me a lot of pickups, as they say. Okay, so Aisha, I was just wondering about the writing process and the whole idea of emotion has also come in. And I was just wondering, if you immerse yourself so deeply in the story and start to go all the way back, you feel, because I was just thinking that one of the emotions that might come up is actually a sense of fear. Because I think going back, the further back you go, the more unknown territory it is. And even from a modern perspective, one of the things that I always imagine when I think back is darkness, because I do know that there's a lot of light right now. I can't imagine when the only source of light in the night is a little candle or
The kerosene, you know, the
yes.
tin with the wick.
Kerosene.
Where else is that? You know, and you
Yeah.
get yourself in this kind of unknown territories. It's one of the emotions ever feared. You are getting a territory that is totally unknown. And then I also wanted to find out if you ever thought that you might not actually be representing the story correctly. Do you ever think about that? And I was just thinking maybe a good test will be if you keep that story and send it back 100, 200 years ago, closer and closer to the time, would the people there be able to recognize it? Do you ever think of that kind of a thing? So these are just two things that were running through my mind.
Yeah.
As you see, I wanted to keep quiet, but I was supposed to
No, thank you for asking those questions. So in one of the very first versions of the book, it was sort of speculative fiction because I had the protagonist be a character, a girl who was living in contemporary times, and she went up to Salaga to visit her grandmother and fell in a well. and falling in the well took her back in time to her ancestors' era. And I wrote quite a bit of it, but the world just wasn't quite coming together, and sort of answers the second question. And it just didn't feel realistic. Maybe realistic is not the word I want, but it didn't hold up. So then I just decided to go back in time myself and then do that work of piecing together the story. But in that version, the fear was palpable. It was because I felt like I was that character who had fallen into the well. So I'm getting goosebumps as I think about those chapters that I was writing, because suddenly you're in this strange world and you've heard the stories about your grandmother, but you don't even know where you are. You have all this grass surrounding you, and suddenly somebody appears and he's holding these strange weapons. So it was definitely more present in that write-up. And then in the moments when Amina's home is raided as well. So yeah, fear is one of the emotions, definitely. And as to whether this will hold up, honestly, I hadn't thought about that question at all, because I think time is just this continuum. So even though I'm writing about the past, I am using my contemporary mind to tell these stories. So there's this flow, and somebody's going to pick up my story in the future and use it to inspire something else that maybe is set before this. So there's nothing that's quite set in time. And to me, it's a fluid process. And I think I wrote it more for people living in this time than I did it for my ancestors to have a name, but I didn't write it for people who were reading back then. So if that makes sense, I never considered whether I'd hold up. I think I just wanted to tell her story and to bring this world alive, or to life. But you read all sorts of historical fiction, and I guess you do ask yourself, is this anachronistic? Would this really happen? But for me, if there's a good central human story, I almost don't care. It can be set in the past, it can be set in the future. And as long as the world building is believable, I get absorbed into whatever literature or book it is that I'm reading. So I hope I managed to do that.
Any other person for? And it's interesting about when my grandmother, who was a daughter of chiefs and the wife of chiefs, would always say things like, the past, when we would ask her questions and we would be like, how was this? And it must have been nice. And, and she was always adamant from her point of view, and also a view she got from her mother, that the extremes of power, even at the time, and she, talking about colonialism, she didn't think the white folks were anywhere than our chiefs, you see? When sometimes we think like, you know what I mean? But she was like, and she would know because she came from, these households, that the extreme, the polarity of power, even though in traditional Ghanaian setting, African setting, you can actually approach a chief. They can go to their palace. There's no like standing on protocol, But when they could show their power, it was extreme. It was brutal. Which I never, my concept of brutal Africa started with the white incursion. So it's always very interesting what we think and what we, that's just me thinking out loud. Question.
My name is Marianne. I'm the Programs Manager for Student Services at NYU Accra. I think it's been a great.
Raise your voice a bit.
Hello?
Yeah.
So it's been a very interesting week this semester, and on every trip we've had some chat points, thanks to our MC Sharon. And each of the chat points has actually taken us, each and every one of us, to our own customs and traditions. So I was not really surprised when Alpha talked about Masa and all those things, because all of a sudden, on one of the trips, we all had to talk about things that were very peculiar to the places where we had come from. And it's been really interesting. I don't want to be a spoiler, so I'm not going to give out any information. But the last checkpoints were very important to me, because we took all the female characters and we just looked at the International Women's Day this year, and the theme we had, that is hashtag Choose to Challenge. And we felt like each and every woman in there chose to challenge the status quo in a very special way. And for me, I'm really excited to hear that you're thinking about writing something about the twins, because after I had finished reading it, one thing that really stuck with me was that young lady who was not going to allow anybody to change her name from what her father had given her. And for me, she's the most phenomenal person in that book for me. Everybody's been amazing, but I'm really excited to know that we're going to learn more about that young lady, because nobody was going to make her change her name from Hassana to forever. So thank you very much. It's an amazing book. It's been an eye-opener. It really forced us to go back and learn more about our own culture. And I just want to say congratulations and thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
And the first thing is important, I'm not giving anything away, right? Because in contemporary Ghana now, modern, this Southern Ghana thing, we've reduced all our foods to like maybe 7 dishes, right? And the foods that we are losing, I'm fancy, and apparently some 50 years ago, there used to be even a traditional food festival in the villages where the women would decorate the muchia and then come up with a dish. And the people of the village will go around and test, you know. So when you read African books and the cuisine is part of the storytelling, it's really gratifying to see, because it's another way we are just flattening our culture by just 7 foods, and that will be about it. So that's just about it.
Yeah. And they tell a story, like the story of peanuts in West Africa. I have a friend who's writing a nonfiction just on the peanuts. It's fascinating how this one tiny nut traveled from South America. It didn't start in West Africa, from South America to West Africa to Europe. It was grown in the India somewhere, then to the US, where it was like used in baseball games. So just that one food item and how it just changed the world as well. It was used in soaps and lighting lamps and the humble peanut.
Yeah, I'm a peanut addict.
Yeah, the stories.
So lovely. Any other questions? Yeah, before I go back to you two, come in. Yes, no spoilers.
Yeah, absolutely no. Yeah, it's when it's nice, you always have something to say.
Yes.
Aisha, when you mentioned the story of this guy who was being cheated by a silver scepter, this was from 300-400 years ago.
Thousands
Of years ago. You know, it brought to mind a few things that I think quite a few of the things that we continue and struggling with are things that have happened thousands of years back. That incident reminded me of a scene in Sangam Usman's film where this guy pushes his car to the city, was being cheated by a civil servant. And this story was somewhere in 1963. Meanwhile, it had happened 1,000 years ago. But most importantly, it brings me to a line in your book, which is when they were discussing Isana and Na, and they were talking about discussing their beauty and how one was light and one was dark. And there was a comment, a statement like, these days people have been poisoned to think that anything light is better. And the follow-up to that was because the person is not cooked enough. I find that sentence so fascinating, and I want to find out, is this something you heard or is something that you conjured?
I think I made that up. But I sit in my room and just imagine these things. But I like the word cooked a lot, and I think it's a word that I hear a lot in my household. Like my dad and my mom, they have these running jokes, and cooked is a word that comes up a lot. So I think I use it in different forms, but it made sense, like either you're baked or cooked. So it made sense for Amina's mother to describe things that way as well, because She cooks a lot as well, so she would see things that way. And I just imagined, one of those ovens, those round ovens, and going in and coming out and not being baked well. That was a visual that I was going with. Yeah.
Last question. And then I'll give closing comments.
I think I'm not hogging your mic too much,
No.
but just not a question about the book per se, but just a general comment, just to also get your perspective. So generally, there was a Canadian philosopher called Marshall McLuhan, whose writings preceded the internet in the 60s and 70s. And I think a common message that he had was that the medium is the message, right? So instead of looking at what the core of any text or any media is, the way in which it's transmitted is what really defines what the story is about. So when I try to tie back to your book, I'm trying to understand, your book is very much, it's a text-based media, right? And in our parts of the world, we have a rich history of oral-based media as well. So I'm wondering, when you're writing your book, do you think having to write it down may have impacted the way in which the story could have been communicated, as opposed to being in an audio form or in a different context altogether? Do you think maybe going forward, that's something that you could also explore? Maybe you have the story which is transmitted not purely in a text-based format, but in a multimedia format that people would tap into and people could probably understand in a way that you wouldn't necessarily understand if we just read the book, for example. Thank you.
Yeah, so the book does exist in audio form already. It was narrated by Janina Graphics, I think is her name. And yeah, I think there are different ways of transmitting these messages. It would be lovely for this book to be translated into our local languages in text form and in audio form as well. That would be amazing. But I think my job is, and I like to write. So you as an engineer, if this is a project that interests you, go for it. But I can't see myself doing anything else but writing. So this is where my passion is, and this is where I feel the most fulfilled. So I've learned to leave things to the people who can do things that I can't. So for me, it's, whoever is interested in such a project, go for it. And it'd be lovely to see, this in film form, for instance. Maybe I'll learn how to write a screenplay, I don't know. But if there's somebody who already knows how to do this, who would like to adapt it, I would gladly let them do it. So I hope that answers the question.
It's one of the, I have to respond, then I'll.
I know you do.
Look,
I
Masha,
thought you were going to jump in.
because you know this thing about oral whatever. Yeah. Africa is the only continent where we are always being belabored by what we have done. All cultures had oral traditions.
Mm-hmm.
At some point, all people in the world were running around naked, or maybe they had skins. It's only on this continent where every time we are made to contend with what we had done before. I'm not saying that oral tradition is bad, it's fantastic. In fact, a lot of our writers, when you read their work, somebody like Ngugi wa Thiong'o or Chenwate, the reason we remember them, not just for the story, the way you're reading is like they are sitting by the fireside talking to you. But let's not be bogged down by what we have done before. We can't. It's a thing people always do with that sense. So Africa, we used to do this, and it's a bit anthropological. We should be free to run away or forward or by any direction from what we used to do. So I'm not saying that it's something we should leave behind, though, but we must stop referring ourselves so much to go to. We can be made anew while we keep the old. You see, it's not a bad thing for the continent. Yeah. So that's,
and we have a writing tradition too. Like I said before, we have writing traditions that date 2,000, 3,000 years ago. So it's not just oral. Even in the time that I was writing about, some of the wonderful resources I went to were poems that were written in 1900, it's not even 1890s. So people are writing in Arabic, people are writing in Ajami. So it's not all oral. It's like we have all of these things too that exist.
Our main problem is we need to teach our languages more. Then what will happen will happen. Aisha, So I'm concluding. They all have assignments, right? We will take their numbers and maybe we'll come back.
Read it.
But Frankie has promised, he promised me that when this whole COVID wahala is over and the new book comes out, he will have you'll be in Ghana.
Back. I'll be back.
Yeah.
Yes.
And we'll have a live writer meet and greet, and we can mob you and tell you in person how much we adore you. I want to thank you. Again, I want to thank you for the book, for writing this book, which is very important. Have I told you that was important? Which they are all going to read. And we are pleased, Gifty and I especially, that you are going to be in this world for a little bit longer. Because I don't want you to leave it anytime soon. Yes.
I'm not.
So thank you please give her a round of applause. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kena. I'd also like to add my voice that this book is truly a masterpiece because I've had to work on it thematically. And every time I find something new. So we are very grateful for spending time with us and for creating a masterpiece. Thank you so much. We are honored to have you. At this point, you already know my name, that I'm Sharon. So I'm going to invite the alumni to introduce themselves to us. Please tell us your name, your fondest memory of NYU, and then one fun fact about you.
I'm not an alum, but I also have a fun memory. So when they are done, I would like to talk about my fun memory of NYU.
Please set the ball rolling, please.
Alpha, because it's closest to the mic.
Thank you.
My name is Alpha, Yahya Alpha Suzero. I'm probably the only Ghanaian to have gone to NYU Teach Asia. The only reason being the school is no more. But I've been involved with NYU Accra since inception and work closely with quite a few of authors too. And I guess I don't have any recollection of any fun moments other than to say that my procrastination hasn't left me. I still haven't finished reading your book. But I think one of the things that you mentioned of going to do your MFA at NYU, which gave you the opportunity to network and call a few people when you have to write stories or ask a question. I guess it's probably one of the best things to go to a school like NYU, because you have a pool of human resource from your lecturers to friends, colleagues, to anyone you can call on, and they're always willing. And I think that's probably one of the amazing things from you going to NYU. But at any point in time, it doesn't matter what department you have friends you can call and ask what you want to know. Right? I think it's incredible. So
Any fun facts, please? Any fun facts to share with us? Wow.
Probably I'll save that to the last. Let someone else come.
Thank you. Okay.
Wow. I always said the year that I came here, that was the Renaissance. The way I danced, the way I walked, what I listened to, everything changed. And that was my entry into Ghana. And I always said that I would come back. And I've been living in Ghana consistently. Oh my gosh, September will be 7 years. So yes, I'm the alumni that came back. I'm Jamaican American. And this is all out of order. My name is Lakeisha. I'm Lakeisha Marie. I run a communications consultancy. I love Ghana, like real love, not honeymoon stage, not party in December and I'm out in 1 month to meet, like real love. So yeah, I've been here for 7 years and my, vision or desire is to connect the diaspora with the African continent, of course, that is Ghana. And yeah, it's just a beloved place. And there's a lot of growing that I've done here, a lot of parts of myself that I've seen here in Ghana. So yeah, that's a bit about me, and my work is done under my company for communications. So if anyone wants to connect, I'd be happy.
Nice to meet you.
Don't be shy. You're at home.
All right, this is like orientation again. Okay.
Some of us have forgotten, it's so long ago.
My name is Ahmed Ahmedappa. I'm with NYU Abu Dhabi, class of 2016. So I train as an engineer, but my day-to-day job is a bit removed from that. I work in the telecoms industry. And in that space, I help executives plan network rollouts and plan various initiatives across the country. I think my point experience at NYU is that that's the very first in my life where I'd say my mind was cracked open and I experienced different worldview. Prior to that, I grew up in Ghana up until 17 or 18. And I found it a bit stifling here, right? Because things are very much in a particular way. But going abroad for NYU really opened my mind up. It showed me there's so many ways in which you could do things differently. It showed me how things could be done. It showed me the potential for Ghana itself. That's why I'm back here. And it showed me that you don't have to go to NYU per se, but you need to surround yourself with an environment that challenges you and pushes you beyond your comfort zone. And that may not necessarily be going to NYU per se, but that's something that makes a challenge your current environment. And NYU was having for that, but I think for other people, it's something else. And for that, I'm very grateful. A fun fact to be, that's not very interesting per se, but I was the first Ghanaian student to go to NYU Abu Dhabi. This was in 2012. So I guess, yeah, a pioneering student. And we all know what that entails. You are supposed to be the model student for your juniors to follow up, but I think I'm doing an okay job there. Nice to meet you again, Aisha. I think I met you in 2010 back in high school. I went to SOS in Tema. That's when you had a book tour. And I think you spoke to us briefly, and I think that was one reason why I looked to NYU as well, because I figured if someone from my school was able to do this, you sort of blazed a path for us to also follow through as well. So thank you so much for the time. I know this 10 years ago.
You are missing a career in diplomacy. I kid you not. Absolutely, wow.
Thank you, yes, please.
Right? There's one person coming.
Hi, my name is Joseph. Hi everyone. So I actually went to NYU Abu Dhabi, class of 2019. So by the way, it's a pleasure to be here. Most importantly, to actually talk about your book. I'm currently into software development. That's what I do now. Yes, to talk about your book, just a quick chip-in set of questions. So I actually had the opportunity to visit Salaga before, and the geography, of course, I understand there's of course a reason why you chose the northern part and the story about the walls and why there's a need for walls and all of that, because of the geography of the whole setup. I also have the opportunity to visit Bimbula, Kwendi, and all these areas. So it's been great to be around to actually see you give much more deeper insights about your own work. And so, fondest memory of NYU Abu Dhabi. I really enjoyed the conferences that we took, where we could share ideas and not only from your own perspective, but also having the opportunity to view things from other point of view. And I also love football, so I really miss my NYU Falcon football team so much. So it's been good to be back again and to share this wonderful time with you and Alumni as well.
Thank you, Joseph.
NYU class of 1985. So it's quite interesting. I think somebody was 2019. Grandson. But it's extremely good to be here. I was at the New York campus, and I was at the film school, which was further up on the east. I don't know whether it's still there. It was years ago. And my fondest moments was there was a an Afghanistan restaurant there called the Kabul. And they actually served rice and goat, which was just like the Ghanaian one. So I was always at the Kabul every time. But once again, I really, Gifty, thank you for inviting me here. And you're so impressive. And I'm very proud of you. Let me say one more time, congratulations. And I'll link you up on my show so soon through Zoom. So thank you very much. Okay.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Hi everyone, good evening. So my name is Haruna Hassan. Hi Aisha. I really had fun reading your book. Just sorry that I actually came late. So I went to NYU Accra Gardens in class of 2018. The fun fact I had was the opportunity for us to go outside, like see the world. And also this where we actually were in the same space with people from different backgrounds. So I really got to understand how people think and how people are from different cultures and everything. And one of the craziest moments I had during my time in NYU was when I was in NYU, New York. I still had a feel for Ghana that I actually once went to Bronx for Ghanaian food when the weather forecast was for a very strong snow during like the night. So I had to make it back by midnight though, but it was actually good. And I also enjoyed reading your book so much that I wanted to ask you how you came by for the name, because I felt like I didn't really get a feel for the words until like the late stage of the book. That was when Amina met the other lady. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
The question was, why the title? How did you come
Okay.
to pick the title?
I think it was the most evocative thing I saw when I went up to Salaga. Just I was so marked by these wells, which are still there, that came to me. I knew the title would have something to do with the 100 wells. For a long time, it was just the 100 wells. And then as I edited the book with Bibi Bakari Yusuf of Cassava Republic, she thought we should put the place as well. So then it became the 100 wells of Salaga. But to me, it's telling because a well is this symbol of, it's this symbol of replenishment, slaking of thirst, and yet these wells were dug for a very different reason. So I thought it was an interesting play on words and meaning as well.
One more person.
One more.
Online.
Yeah, hi. My name is Audrey. I hope all of you can hear me. So I think I might be the most recent graduate from NYU. I graduated last year, so I'm class of 2020. I actually graduated from the Shanghai campus. And just a bit about myself. So I actually grew up in Ghana. I'm from Kumasi, so I mean, I live in Kumasi. So I'm sorry I couldn't come, be present today. But thank you so much, NYU Accra, for letting me join in through Zoom. It's been great listening to the whole, the interview and everything. And I was at NYU Accra actually my last semester, so the whole COVID era, so I had to go through all of that. And even though my semester was cut short, I think it was a great experience. And I really like the fact that I ended my time, in NYU back in Ghana. And I just like to thank NYU Accra as well. Because even though I grew up here in Ghana, I think I learned a lot more about Ghana, like the history and like everything through NYU Accra. And I really wish I read your book last year. I took a class on colonialism and modern African literature with Professor Anidoho. And I think it would have been great to have studied your work together with the class. But thank you so much for this opportunity. And a fun experience, I would say, definitely traveling, because I was in the Shanghai campus, but then I got to study away in Accra and Berlin. So that was definitely the NYU experience, going outside and experiencing all around the world. So thank you.
Thank you. Nice to see you again.
I didn't know NYU had all these campuses. Anyway, here's my story. In the 90s, my mother, Amate, and an African-American poet now dead called Jane Cortez formed an association called, I think they called it Association of Women Writers of Africa, right? Descended. And, but the name of the organization was Yari Yari. And they hosted the first, so they had this idea that they would bring together women writers of African descent from all over the world. And for the reason that I am not well versed in, NYU New York agreed to host the first conference. And at the time I was living in New York and working at Columbia. So my mom came, put my mother aside. The thing that was magical was that there were writers there that I had been reading my whole life. Some of them like Octavia Butler, you should read, a science fiction African-American writer. And the opportunity for readers to meet Toni Morrison was there. You know, these women writers was mine. I have never forgotten it, which is why it's so important that Frankie is also a writer and is continuing the meet and greet of writers here. So thank you. So that was my advice.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing. Okay, so I'd like to thank you all once again for honoring our invitation and coming into our space, which is your home, a great location of alumni and book chat events. We are really grateful. I'm going to hand over the microphone to our site director to share a few words with us. Professor Josian.
Thank you. This is going to be really, really brief. Hi, Sean.
Hi, Frankie.
And I go way back to when our books were out and new, and we were trying to explain them to the rest of the world. So it is my mission to get you to NYU Accra in person next year when your book is out and you can actually come and visit us. Because as I've been telling everyone who has violet in their blood, this is home. NYU Accra is your home. So when you come home to see your parents, you come and you be with us too. We are so, so grateful for you and everything that you've done with the 100 Balls of Saga. For me, it's been a teaching experience everywhere I go. And I talk about Ghana, I reference the book. And I tell people that, yes, of course, African literature is exciting, but there's so much about us that you don't know about that you can find within the pages of the book. Now, people who know me well know that one of my favorite sayings is "Book saved my life," because I really believe that you can find the answers to everything in the pages of a book. I also really believe that all of our stories are in pages of books that we may not have had access to them. And one of the amazing things about going to NYU or working at NYU is the access to books that we have. Through books libraries, through conferences, through departments, through our creative writing program, we are all about getting people to look at their own stories and to look at what they can learn from books that are not textbooks. So I shall thank you so much, and we can't wait to have you here. Tina, thank you so much. Anytime we ask Tina to do something for us, she always says yes, even before I've gotten the request out. So thank you so much. I also have to thank Project Know Thyself for giving us the water and the refreshments that some of us are going to have, and the beautiful flowers that are here from Nana and Ango. So thank you so much. Alumni, this is your house. A house that has a weak foundation cannot survive. NYU has been around for over a century. NYU is the quintessential global university because we are everywhere. And here in Africa, we're in Accra. But we cannot survive, and we could not have survived without all the wonderful people who have become alumni of NYU, who have graduated from NYU and have come back and have helped us to continue to educate the next generation of people. So all I have to say to you guys is that we here at NYU Accra will continue to look at you alumni and continue to ask us to come and help us as we educate those of us who are students now and the students that will be coming to Ghana to learn about Africa. Alumni, this is your home.
This is your house. We are so, so proud of all the things that you're doing. Aisha, thank you for the book. There is a book coming out. It's actually out already called Bring Back Our Girls. It is the definitive book about what happened in Nigeria with Boko Haram. That was also written by an NYU alumni called Joe Hinshaw, who was one of the first students to come to NYU Accra. So when I look at the environment of what it is that NYU Accra alumni and NYU in general's alumni is producing, I have to say to myself that we have to always look sometimes at our foundation, and the alumni are our foundation. So from the bottom of my heart, I thank you all for coming. I thank you all for reading. You know, Martin's here. The few of us who have not read 100 Rolls of Sourdough, Martin will help us get those books into your hands. So thank you everybody for coming. It is much, much appreciated. I'll be walking around and trying to get all of the business cards and talking to you one-on-one. But on behalf of the entire NYU Accra community, we thank you and we hope that you will continue to be with us. A little programming note, we're going to have one of our signature events, which we call the Laboni Dialogues. That will be in about 3 weeks. We're going to have a conversation about artists and activism. And it will feature One Love the Kubalan. You all will get invitations to that. We hope you can join us. So thank you very much for everything that all of you do. We are very, very grateful.
Thank you too.
Thank you.